Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the question, do game players even know what they like? I almost called this Game Players Don't Know What They Like, but I figured it would lead to a better comment section if I posed it as a question. Let me tell you why I thought of this. I was watching a comedian podcast, not a comedy podcast. I wasn't watching comedians do stand-up. I was talking about comedians talk with each other about being comedians. And one of them made a comment that it's very hard to come up with jokes in a world where audience only know what they find unfunny. And most of them couldn't write a joke if their lives depended on it, especially a joke that you could say in stand-up. And I thought that was interesting because, first of all, I've met a lot of people who think they're funny and they are not funny. But also, stand-up comedy is a perfect example of it doesn't require any equipment or anything. It's basically you and it's pure skill. And there's a lot of people who think they're good at it who are not good at it. And I thought that was interesting because it was purely skill-based. But what the comedian was essentially saying is it's hard to get feedback from an audience because they'll laugh when you say something funny and groan or boo when you say something not funny, but they're not actually telling you what it is they liked and didn't disliked about those jokes. You only know whether it was a hit or a miss. This is similar in the game industry, but what really knocked it home for me is someone mentioned a George R.R. Martin quote, which I looked up. He was talking about book readers, and he said, quote, "Now social media is ruled by anti-fans who would rather talk about the stuff they hate than the stuff they love." Unquote. Now, whether or not social media is the cause, I don't know. That's a whole other discussion. I don't even want to have it. But I do see a rise over the decades of my career in how games are discussed, in person and online, which is a prioritization of the bad features over the good. People love to talk about what they hate. And some of them almost never even mention what it is they like. What would they prefer instead? And I get it with the rise of monetized channels. I totally understand that rage bait gets more clicks. So if you go on and have a channel and you go, I hate this and these people are dumb and blah, you get more clicks just because that's what people respond to. But it doesn't really explain forums or comment sections where the people who are leaving the comments, they have no stake in how many people read their comment. But still, you find that complaints about features are on the rise, and constructive feedback saying, I wish they had done this instead, or I like this in my games, is on the decline. At least, at the very minimum, the ratio has been increasing from bad to good. The weird thing about this is I see people complaining about features that they can 100% absolutely ignore. Yes, the game has that feature. Yes, the game is 100% playable without the feature. But they complain that the feature exists. Like, oh, it's there, it's looking at me. This comes up a lot about microtransactions. There are games that have 100% cosmetic-only microtransactions. People will still complain they're there, even though those transactions in no way make the game easier to play, or it's not pay to win, it's just cosmetic microtransactions. I've mentioned this before, and people's response were, whoa, some of these people are spending or gambling addicts, and they can't control themselves, and this is predatory, and it's horrible. But then I did a fast travel video, and I'll link it below, where I said, well, what about fast travel? There are games, now you're right, some people brought up there are some games that aren't designed well, so if you don't have fast travel and quest markers are harder to play, but there are a lot of games that you do not need to use fast travel. And they even have some difficulty modes where you can't. But guess what? People still do it anyway. Those games are provably that fast travel was not necessary to play the game or even to enjoy the game. But almost everybody does it anyway. There's no gambling component. And people will then go, well, it's more convenient or something like that. But they will do it even when non-fast travel rewards them by giving them fun encounters or new location discovery. They will still use fast travel, which makes the game a lesser experience for them, but they can't seem to bring themselves not to use it. And then that's when they turn around and say, well, it's the designer's fault. He never should have put that in the first place. Which is, again, a whole other discussion of how much handholding do you want? And handholding in this case is how much should the designer not let you pick and choose how you want to play the game? Should he force you to play it the way that you want to play it and is the way you'll enjoy it and ignore millions of other players? And I'll get to that because a lot of you give feedback as if you're the only person on the planet, but you assume your views represent everyone else. But I'll get to that. I've said before in many videos, if players would only talk more about what they want instead of what they don't want, this would be so much better and so much clearer and so much cleaner feedback. First of all, it gives developers a much better idea of how many people want those certain features. If you just say you don't like fast travel, but you don't say what you want instead, they're not sure how to implement that fast travel-less game. Do you want more encounters? Do you want a paid way of doing fast travel? Do you want a resource-intensive way of doing fast travel? What do you want? Because doing nothing is 100% giving you not fast travel. But that's probably not what you want. You probably want something in exchange for not having the fast travel. And if you think this should be as simple as putting a checkbox in saying, turn off fast travel, you can see my video on doing difficulty, where there are people out there that think certain options should be decided by the designer, not the player, and therefore should not be provided in the options menu. They basically say, don't make me decide how to play your game. Just be aware that there's no good solution to this because there are lots of players out there who want lots of options. They love playing around like, oh, good, the game lets me turn off the HUD. Oh, good, the game lets me turn off fast travel. They want that. They look for that. So there is no good solution for a developer. The problem is when people just tell you what they don't want, it's hard to get an idea of what the percentage is of people who want an alternative. It's like, okay, I know you don't want fast travel, but what do you want? Do you want more random encounters? Do you want a paid fast travel? Things like that. Or if you're tired of me talking about fast travel, I've done 2 different videos on encumbrance. And there are plenty of people who think that how items should be available and what should happen after you pick them up should be handled differently. Read the comment section. I'm not sure people were reading them. People were leaving comments saying, everybody hates encumbrance. And then literally the next comment was, oh, I love when games have encumbrance. I'm not sure people read the comments because there are a lot of comments where people love to say categorically, no one likes this, everyone hates this, right after a comment or before a comment of somebody saying they like it. So please take a look at the comment. In fact, let's talk a little bit about how to comment. Like I said, I would way prefer on this channel and for any forum where you're talking to game developers, say what it is you liked, especially why you like doing that feature. I have an entire video on how to give good feedback. It's called Being Constructive. It's way easier to respond to constructive feedback than non-constructive feedback. So what I don't understand is if you really want to get what you want, say what it is you want. Now, some people just like, no, I've got to say what I dislike. It's not fair. Saying what you dislike is just as useful. It is if it's specific, which many of you aren't. There is a video I have called Feedback Needs Context. So you need to watch that. But let me give you the high-level example there, which is, if you just go, enemies are dumb, stop giving us dumb enemies. Okay, you just give negative feedback, but you give absolutely no context. So it's not like they can go in and go, hey, programmer, can you click the checkbox for smart enemies? It may be that what you meant was, these enemies never take cover. There's cover all over the place that I use, but they never take it. Oh, you want enemies to take cover more frequently. Okay, that's constructive. I can work on that. So think of it as a wish list too. Like imagine somebody came up to you and said, hey, what do you think Tim Kaine would like for his birthday? If you said he would love a dark chocolate bar, at least 65% cacao, versus he hates white chocolate, what do you think is more likely to get me something I want? The first one, I'm going to get a dark chocolate bar that's at least 65% cacao, which immediately puts it in a range of chocolate that I absolutely adore. But the person who said he hates white chocolate, I may get a Snickers bar. Well, I don't want anyone back on Snickers. Snickers are okay. But you can see that just saying I hate white chocolate, maybe they're getting me a boat. I don't want a boat, but they're like, well, it's not white chocolate. This is why it's so hard for developers to deal with your negative feedback. You're not telling them what you want. Just telling a developer what you don't want, guess what? The space of what you could want is huge, and you're not helping. In fact, you're in many ways you're hurting because you're jamming up the channel of communication with noise, with unactionable feedback. So you may think, well, this may not help, but it doesn't hurt. It hurts. It jams up communication channels. Now, devs also want to provide games with features that are most wanted, because if you say, I like hot air balloon travel, and you're the only one among millions of potential game players, you're probably not going to get that. Maybe from a solo dev, but you're not going to get a big one. So that brings me to the question of this channel, of this particular video. Do gamers even know what it is they like? And I say this because people will say they want certain features, almost that they demand certain features and that they hate other ones. But then the sales figures do not bear that out. They buy games that don't have the features they claim they demand, and they buy games with features they claim they hate. And I get that because games are an amalgamation of different features. It may have had some things you want and some things you don't, which is why it could really help when you leave feedback on that game. You say, I bought it because of these features, but I wished you had had these instead. But the reason sales may not bear out what it is you said you wanted is, one, you may be a minority opinion. You may really want a certain feature, but most people don't, or they don't care about it. And you can say, everybody wants this, but not a lot of people do. I have a whole video on voiceover about that. And there were people who go, I don't care about voiceover. There are people who say I only buy games with voiceover. And there are people who said, yeah, I sometimes don't buy a game because if everything's voiced, I know it's a little rigid. But the flip side of why sales figures may not bear out your opinion is you may not guide your spending based on your beliefs. And this can be knowingly or unknowingly. You may buy a game not knowing, you didn't check the reviews and you didn't realize it did this thing you don't like. That would be unknowingly. The knowingly part is when you say you don't want something, but you buy games that have it anyway because they're popular, because your friends are playing it, because it had a couple extra things you did like. Well, guess what? The devs can't figure out what's going on because people said they didn't want this, but the game sold well. One issue is that none of those groups, people who are minority opinion or people whose spending doesn't align with their beliefs, whether knowingly or not, none of those groups are ever going to be well served by big business, by AAA games. And it's because they literally have to go after majority opinion to try to sell better. Occasionally there's a breakthrough where a game that no one expected or ever asked for busts through and everybody loves it. That's rare. And I've talked about with big budgets come less risk. If you have a minority opinion or you're somebody who doesn't spend like you talk, take a look at indie games. There's a ton of them. I'm sure there's one for you. In fact, there are so many games out there, more games than you could ever play. There's more games out there that align exactly with how you want to play games than you could ever possibly purchase or play, and they already exist. So that leads me to the question of why is everybody going online to complain? Because there are a ton of games that you would love. And the only conclusion I have is that you just like doing it. You just like complaining. And if that's you, that's fine. I get it. Just bear in mind, it's not helping you get better games that you want. It would be far better if you said exactly what it is you want instead of just saying what it is you don't want. And then you have to sit and have that conversation with yourself. Do you even know what it is you want? Do you know what you like?